You stopped mid-thought tonight. Not because you ran out of ideas, but because the ideas stopped connecting the way they should. The words were there. The problem was clear. And still, nothing came. Science has a name for that gap. And it turns out, the brain has been quietly solving it all along. Not when you push harder, but when you finally let go. What happens inside the brain as it lets go? And why does creativity live in that loosening? The answer lives somewhere between waking and sleep, between effort and release, between the mind that tries and the one that drifts. Welcome to Sleepy Science. Tonight begins where the trying stops. Close your eyes and breathe slowly. You are here. The loosening has begun. Let your jaw soften. Let your shoulders settle. And now we begin. The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons, each capable of forming thousands of connections with others. But what makes the brain extraordinary is not its raw computing power. It is the way those connections shift depending on your state of mind. When you are alert and focused, certain pathways dominate. When you begin to drift towards sleep, entirely different networks come alive. Researchers have found that the brain does not simply power down at night. It reorganizes. And in that reorganization, something quietly opens that was not available during the busy hours of the day. That opening is where tonight begins. During waking hours, the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive center, acts as a filter. It evaluates ideas before they fully form, discarding associations that seem too strange, too distant, or too unlikely to be useful. This filtering is efficient for focused tasks, but it comes at a cost. Many of the brain's most interesting connections never reach awareness at all. They are edited out before you can notice them. The prefrontal cortex, in its effort to keep thought organized, quietly closes doors that might otherwise open onto something new. Every creative connection it prevents is invisible. You never know what you almost thought of. The default mode network, a set of brain regions including the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate, and the angular gyrus, is most active when the mind is not focused on a specific task. For decades, neuroscientists assumed this network was simply the brain idling between useful activities. More recent imaging research has revised that view entirely. The default mode network is now understood to be deeply involved in imagination, future thinking, and the spontaneous connection of ideas from different domains. When attention relaxes, this network does not go quiet. It begins to work, often on the very problems that focused effort could not unlock. Creativity, as researchers define it, is not the production of entirely new ideas from nothing. It is the recombination of existing knowledge in ways that are novel and useful. The brain stores information in networks, clusters of related concepts, memories, and associations built up across a lifetime. A creative insight occurs when two distant networks make contact unexpectedly. The more rigid the boundaries between those networks, the less often that contact happens. Relaxation. Genuine, physiological relaxation begins to soften those boundaries. Distance between ideas decreases. Contact becomes more likely. The raw material for creativity has always been present. What changes is the brain's willingness to let it cross. In 2016, psychologists Daria Zabalina and Michael Andrews published research examining the relationship between mental fatigue and creative thought. Their findings were counterintuitive. Participants who were mentally tired, less able to maintain focused, directed attention, consistently performed better on tasks requiring remote associations and original thinking. The mechanism was what the researchers called leaky attention, a state in which the brain's filtering systems become less effective, allowing a wider range of incoming information and internal associations to reach conscious awareness. The fatigue that feels like failure is, in some ways, the brain beginning to create. The filter that held ideas apart has simply grown too tired to keep them separated. Sleep researchers use the term hypnagogic state to describe the brief window between full wakefulness and the onset of sleep, a period corresponding to the first stage of the sleep cycle, known as N1. In this state, muscle tone decreases, eye movement slow, and the brain's electrical activity shifts from the fast beta waves of alert thinking toward the slower alpha and theta waves associated with relaxed awareness and early sleep. This transition takes only minutes. But within those minutes, the brain enters a mode of processing that is unlike anything available during ordinary waking consciousness. The categories that organize thought begin to soften. The distance between ideas quietly narrows. In 2021, a research team led by Celia Lacaux at the Paris Brain Institute published a study in the journal Science Advances that directly measured creative problem-solving ability during the hypnagogic state. Participants held a glass in their hand while drifting towards sleep, a method adapted from the habits of inventor Thomas Edison, who reportedly napped with steel balls in his hands for the same reason. When the glass dropped, participants were woken immediately. Those who had entered N1 sleep, but had not progressed further into deeper sleep stages, were nearly 3 times more likely to have solved a previously unsolvable mathematical problem. The N1 window was specific. Deeper sleep did not produce the same effect. The reason the N1 window appears so generative may be related to the gradual withdrawal of norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter closely associated with alertness, focus, and the suppression of irrelevant information. As the brain moves towards sleep, norepinephrine levels begin to fall. With less of this chemical maintaining the signal-to-noise ratio of focused thought, the brain's ability to filter out loosely related associations diminishes. Information that would have been suppressed during waking attention begins to surface. The brain does not become less active. It becomes differently active, reaching across distances it would not have crossed an hour before, finding connections it had been too organized to notice. Thomas Edison is not the only historical figure associated with the hypnagogic state and creative insight. Salvador Dali reportedly used the same technique, holding an object while napping to capture the imagery that appeared as he drifted towards sleep. Nikola Tesla described vivid visual experiences in the moments before sleep as a primary source of his inventions. These accounts share a common structure. The thinker reaches toward the threshold deliberately, knowing something waits there. More recently, researchers have begun to systematically study what these individuals had discovered intuitively, that the boundary between waking and sleep is not merely a transition. It is a state with its own cognitive properties, available to anyone who learns to pause there. So far, what the science reveals is this: the creative brain is not the focused brain. It is the relaxing brain, the brain that is releasing its grip on directed thought, allowing networks that do not normally communicate to drift into proximity. The prefrontal filter is not yet fully off. That comes later, in deep sleep, but it has begun to loosen. And in that loosening, the associations that were held apart by the efficiency of waking attention begin to find each other. What happens inside the brain as it lets go is already happening. Here, in this quiet hour, that is where the facts ahead are going. REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, is the stage most associated with vivid dreaming. It typically occurs first about 90 minutes after falling asleep and recurs in longer cycles through the night. During REM, the brain is highly active, producing electrical patterns that resemble those of waking consciousness in their complexity and speed. But the neurochemical environment is profoundly different. Norepinephrine and serotonin, the chemical signals of alertness and mood regulation, are almost entirely absent during REM. Acetylcholine, associated with memory and associative processing, is elevated. The result is a brain that is alert in its activity but unfiltered in its connections, a state that waking life rarely replicates. The unfiltered quality of REM sleep has direct consequences for the kind of thinking the brain performs. Without the chemical signals that normally maintain categorical boundaries, keeping professional problems separate from childhood memories, separating half-remembered conversations from abstract concepts, the sleeping brain draws connections across ordinarily separate domains. Researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, building on work by Matthew Walker and colleagues, have documented that REM sleep specifically enhances the ability to detect hidden patterns and make non-obvious associations. The cognitive signature of what we call insight. The sleeping brain is not thinking less carefully. It is thinking more widely. A 2004 study by Ulrich Wagner and colleagues at the University of Lübeck provided one of the clearest demonstrations of sleep's role in creative problem-solving. Participants were trained on a mathematical task that had a hidden shortcut, a rule that could reduce a long calculation to a single step. After a night of sleep, participants were more than twice as likely to discover the shortcut as those who had remained awake during the interval. The sleep group did not consciously practice. They simply slept. The insight emerged during the night, surfacing into awareness when they returned to the problem in the morning. The phenomenon researchers call incubation describes the process by which problems that appear unsolvable during focused effort become solvable after a period of rest or distraction. The mechanism behind incubation is not fully understood, but one prominent hypothesis involves the continued processing of problem-related information during states of reduced conscious control, including sleep. While the waking mind disengages from the problem, the sleeping mind continues to work on it. free from the constraints of directed attention and the confirmation bias that often accompanies focused effort. The problem has not been abandoned. It has been handed to a part of the brain that works differently. And, for certain kinds of problems, more effectively, associative thinking, the ability to connect ideas across distant conceptual domains, is consistently higher in people who report more flexible, fluid mental states. Research by Sandy Mann and Rebecca Cadman at the University of Central Lancashire found that participants who engaged in a boring, repetitive task immediately before a creativity test significantly outperformed a control group. The boredom induced a mild form of mind wandering, a low arousal, undirected mental state in which the default mode network becomes more active. The conclusion was quiet but significant. The unfocused mind is not an unproductive mind. It is a mind that has stopped selecting and started ranging, which is the beginning of finding something new. The default mode network and the executive control network, the brain regions associated with focused, goal-directed thinking, have traditionally been described as having an inverse relationship. When one is active, the other is suppressed. More recent research has complicated this picture considerably. Highly creative individuals appear to show greater connectivity between these two networks and greater ability to shift between them fluidly, rather than choosing between focused thought and open thought. The creative brain may be better described as one that holds both in dynamic balance, able to generate widely and evaluate carefully in rapid alternation. The networks are not opponents. They are partners who take turns. The prefrontal cortex, the region most associated with evaluation, judgment, and the suppression of inappropriate responses, undergoes measurable changes in activity during the transition to sleep. Neuroimaging studies have documented a progressive reduction in prefrontal activity as individuals move from wakefulness through N1 into deeper sleep stages. This reduction is not uniform across the brain. Regions associated with emotional processing and long-term memory storage remain active or become more active as the prefrontal settles. The sleeping brain is not a quieter brain overall. It is a brain in which the editor has stepped back and the rest of the staff have quietly begun their own work. Sleep spindles, brief bursts of electrical activity that appear in the brain's EEG, recording during stage 2 NREM sleep, have been linked to memory consolidation and cognitive flexibility. Research examining sleep spindle density found that individuals with more frequent spindles showed better performance on tasks requiring creative insight and flexible thinking after sleep. Sleep spindles are generated largely by the thalamus, a structure that acts as a relay station between sensory input and the cortex, and appear to play a role in strengthening connections between memory traces that were formed separately during waking experience. Each spindle is a small act of integration happening in the dark. The phenomenon of sleeping on a problem has been documented across cultures and across history. Ancient Greek physicians recommended sleep as a remedy for confusion. Indigenous traditions in many parts of the world describe dreams as a source of guidance for practical problems, not only spiritual ones. The recurring appearance of this idea across such different contexts and centuries suggests that humans have long observed even without formal explanation. That something useful happens to complex problems during the night. Contemporary neuroscience has begun to supply the mechanism for an observation that preceded it by millennia. The intuition was correct. The science arrived later. Not all sleep is equally generative for creative thinking. Research suggests that the creative benefits of sleep are most pronounced when REM sleep is involved, and REM sleep is most abundant in the later cycles of the night, typically in the hours before natural waking. This means that the full creative benefit of sleep is more likely to be realized after a complete night's rest than after a short nap or an interrupted sleep period. The brain that has had time to move through multiple complete sleep cycles emerges into morning with a reorganized associative architecture. The ideas that surface then have been quietly sorted during the night. Researchers have identified what they call the morning effect, the tendency for creative insights and novel solutions to problems to emerge most frequently in the first period of waking consciousness after sleep. This is the time when the prefrontal cortex is gradually re-engaging. But the loose associative connections formed during REM have not yet been fully pruned by the returning demands of focused attention. The window is brief. Many people report that ideas vivid upon waking fade or transform within minutes of full alertness. Capturing the morning state through journaling, quiet, attention, or deliberate delay of stimulation, appears to extend this creative window before the filter returns. The relationship between sleep and creativity is not limited to problem solving. Research has also examined how sleep affects artistic and linguistic creativity. Studies exploring REM, sleep, and narrative processing have found that this stage specifically enhances the ability to integrate emotionally significant experiences with abstract structural frameworks, the kind of integration that underlies storytelling, metaphor construction, and artistic expression. The sleeping brain does not only recombine facts, it recombines feeling-toned memories with narrative structures in ways that waking attention rarely produces. Something made of both thought and feeling becomes possible in the night that neither element could construct alone. There is a practical implication to the research on sleep and creativity that has received relatively little attention outside scientific circles. The common cultural habit of immediately reaching for a phone, newsfeed, or task list upon waking may functionally shorten or eliminate the creative window that follows sleep. Stimulation, even mild visual or informational stimulation, triggers the re-engagement of the prefrontal cortex and the suppression of the default mode network. The quiet, slightly unfocused state of early morning, which many people experience as unproductive and fill accordingly, may in fact be the most neurologically generative period of the day. The window closes quickly. It reopens every morning. Sleep architecture. The pattern of sleep stages across a night varies across the lifespan. Children spend a higher proportion of their sleep time in REM. Adolescents show a delayed circadian phase, meaning their biological clock shifts their optimal sleep window later into the night. A shift that is genuinely neurobiological, not simply behavioral. Adults over 60 tend to experience less REM and more light NREM sleep. These developmental changes in sleep architecture correspond to observed changes in the nature of creative thought across the lifespan, not in its presence or absence, but in its texture, timing, and the domains in which it most readily appears. The pattern across the first arc of tonight is this. The brain does not hold creativity in reserve for the alert, well-rested, optimally focused mind. It holds it at the edges of focus, in the fatigue that softens the filter, in the drift toward N1 where the editor steps back, in the REM cycles that quietly reorganize what the day gathered. The central question, what happens inside the brain as it lets go, already has a partial answer. The grip loosens, the networks spread, and connection becomes possible in directions the focused mind would not have approved. What the second arc follows is what happens next. When that loosening goes deeper, that is where we continue. The mind's stories so far have been soft, and more are waiting just ahead. Perhaps this gentle space brings you comfort. A quiet subscribe helps another restless mind find it too. Now, breathe with us, one sleepy soul at a time. Right now, the norepinephrine in your brain is lower than it was when you first lay down. Not because of anything you did, because you stopped adding to it. That chemical, the one that keeps the filter tight, that holds the categories in place, has a natural flaw, and your brain has been moving toward it since the moment you settled here. The question that just opened, about what happens when the loosening goes all the way down, past an uxi, into the deeper architecture of the night, lives in exactly this chemistry. Notice your breath. The system is already moving toward its answer. Now we continue. The hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped structure buried deep in the temporal lobe, plays a central role in the formation of new memories. During waking hours, it acts as a temporary holding structure, binding together the elements of new experiences into coherent episodic records. During sleep, and particularly during slow-wave NREM sleep, the hippocampus replays these newly formed memories at accelerated speed, transferring them to the neocortex for long-term storage. This process, called memory consolidation, does not simply preserve what the day recorded. It integrates new experiences with existing knowledge, creating connections that were not present when the memories were first formed. The integration that occurs during sleep consolidation creates what researchers call schema updating, the revision of existing mental frameworks in light of new information. When a new experience fits neatly into an existing schema, consolidation is relatively straightforward. When it does not fit, when it challenges an existing framework or introduces a genuinely novel element, consolidation requires more active reorganization. Researchers believe this reorganization process is one mechanism by which sleep produces insight. The brain, forced to accommodate something new, creates a revised framework that is more generative than either the old framework or the new experience alone. The neuroscientist Penelope Lewis at the University of Manchester has studied how the sleeping brain combines memories from different contexts to produce new knowledge in experiments using a virtual reality environment. Participants learned rules about a landscape without being explicitly told that the rules existed. After sleep, participants showed significantly better knowledge of the hidden rules. than participants who had remained awake. The improvement was not explained by simple memory rehearsal. Something during sleep had extracted the underlying structure from the specific experiences, a process Lewis describes as abstraction, or the formation of generalized knowledge from specific instances. One of the more striking aspects of sleep-dependent creativity is that it does not require any conscious intention. Participants in the studies described earlier did not choose to work on their problems during sleep. They were not instructed to. The processing happened without direction, without effort, and largely without awareness. This feature of sleep-dependent insight distinguishes it from most models of deliberate creative practice. The brain, it seems, has a parallel processing system that operates beneath conscious awareness, one that continues to work on open problems using mechanisms quite different from those available during waking attention. The role of emotion in sleep-dependent creativity has received growing research attention. REM sleep is particularly associated with the processing of emotionally significant memories. The neurobiologist Matthew Walker describes REM sleep as a form of overnight therapy, a period in which emotionally charged memories are reactivated in a neurochemical environment, largely free of stress hormones, allowing the emotional charge to be separated from the informational content of the memory. The result is a memory that retains its meaning without retaining its full affective weight. This separation may be one reason that problems which feel overwhelming in the evening often appear more manageable in the morning. Emotional processing during REM sleep may also contribute to creative thinking by making emotionally relevant personal experiences available for broader association. Research has found that people are better able to use emotionally relevant personal experiences as the basis for creative work, in narrative, in problem-solving, in artistic expression, after REM sleep than before it. The memories do not lose their personal quality. They become more portable, more available to be placed in new contexts, and combined with information from entirely different domains. The sleeping brain, in processing emotion, is also quietly expanding the raw material available for creative thought. The concept of creative sleep, deliberately using sleep as a tool for creative work, has been explored by a number of researchers and practitioners. Techniques include reviewing a problem or question before sleep, keeping a notebook beside the bed for morning capture, and protecting the first 15 to 20 minutes after waking from stimulation. Research by Ulrich Wagner and Robert Stickgold suggests that the probability of achieving a creative insight after sleep is significantly higher when the problem has been explicitly loaded into working memory before the sleep period begins. The sleeping brain, it appears, works preferentially on what the waking brain has most recently been holding. Not every night of sleep produces measurable creative benefit. Research has identified several factors that appear to reduce sleep-dependent insight: sleep fragmentation, high stress before sleep, alcohol consumption, which suppresses REM sleep, and sleep deprivation, which disproportionately reduces the later REM-rich cycles. These findings have a practical implication. The conditions that many people associate with working hard, late nights, high-pressure evenings, stimulant use, are precisely the conditions that reduce the brain's capacity to perform the creative reorganization that sleep makes possible. The effort and the outcome are, in this domain, in direct conflict. The circadian rhythm, the roughly 2-4 hour biological clock that regulates sleep timing, body temperature, hormonal release, and dozens of other physiological processes, also influences creative thinking in ways that have only recently been systematically studied. Research by Mareike Weith and Rose Zaks, published in Thinking and Reasoning in 2011, found that individuals perform better on insight problems, the kind requiring creative leaps rather than logical steps, during their off-peak circadian hours. Morning types showed higher creative performance in the evening. Evening types showed it in the morning. Mild circadian misalignment, being slightly off-peak, appears to create the loosened attentional state most hospitable to creative thought. The relationship between alertness and creativity forms what researchers describe as an inverted U-shaped curve. At very low alertness, severe fatigue, heavy sedation, creative performance drops significantly. At very high alertness, acute stress, high arousal, the prefrontal filter is maximally engaged, and creative performance also declines. The peak creative window falls in the region of moderate, relaxed alertness, the state characteristic of gentle fatigue, early morning semi-wakefulness, or the quiet hours before sleep. The brain, at these moments, is engaged enough to process and evaluate, but not so engaged that it closes down the associative range it needs. Mindfulness meditation practice has been associated with increased creative performance in several studies. The proposed mechanism involves the deliberate training of a mental state that shares features with the hypnagogic window, reduced self-referential processing, decreased activity in the default mode network's self-narrative circuits, and increased awareness of the present moment without evaluation. Experienced meditators show greater resting connectivity between the default mode network and the executive control network, the same pattern observed in highly creative individuals. The practice of deliberate mental quieting appears to develop over time. The neural substrate that underlies creative thought. The phenomenon of creative insight is often described subjectively as an aha moment, a sudden, surprising emergence of a solution that was not accessible through deliberate effort. Neuroimaging studies have captured the neural signature of this experience. In the seconds before a reported insight, researchers observe a burst of high-frequency gamma band activity originating in the right anterior temporal lobe, a region associated with the integration of distantly related semantic information. This burst is preceded by a brief period of reduced visual cortex activity, as though the brain momentarily withdraws attention from external input to allow internal associations to surface. The aha moment has a measurable architecture. The right hemisphere of the brain has long been associated, somewhat loosely, with creative thinking. Contemporary neuroscience has refined this picture considerably. The right hemisphere appears to be specifically advantaged in processing coarse semantic associations, the kind of distant, weakly related connections between concepts that underlie novel thinking. The left hemisphere, by contrast, processes fine semantic associations, precise, highly related, expected connections. Creative insight often involves right hemisphere processing because it requires reaching beyond the expected, highly probable associations that left hemisphere processing efficiently provides. The two hemispheres are not in opposition. They process the same information at different resolutions. Sleep deprivation has measurably different effects on different types of cognitive performance. Focused, routine tasks, those that depend primarily on attentional maintenance and procedural memory, are relatively preserved under mild sleep deprivation. Creative, insight-dependent tasks show much steeper decline. This differential vulnerability suggests that the neural systems supporting creative thought are more sensitive to sleep loss than those supporting routine performance. A person who has slept poorly may feel capable of completing a checklist. They are significantly less likely to solve a novel problem or make a non-obvious connection. The brain conserves its more basic functions at the expense of its more generative ones. The acetylcholine system, a network of neurons using acetylcholine as their primary neurotransmitter, plays a particularly interesting role in the neuroscience of creativity and sleep. Acetylcholine levels are high during both waking alertness and REM sleep, but low during deep NREM sleep. During waking, acetylcholine supports focused attention and the encoding of new information. During REM, the same chemical supports a different process: the flexible, associative replay of memory traces across distant brain regions. The same molecule serves two very different cognitive modes, depending on what other neurochemicals are present in its environment. Context changes everything, even at the level of individual neurotransmitters. You've been listening for a while now, or thoughts still flickering, but softer. Just notice where your mind is, not directed anywhere, just noticing. We're exploring the very system doing the exploring right now. The brain that thinks about thinking, that loosens as it rests, that creates while it sleeps. Strange, beautiful, and perfectly calm. Let's drift onward together. The neuroscientist Rex Jung at the University of New Mexico has studied the structural basis of creative thinking. His research found that highly creative individuals show lower white matter integrity in certain frontal lobe pathways, specifically those connecting the prefrontal cortex to other brain regions. Lower white matter integrity in this context means slightly less efficient signal transmission along those pathways. The counterintuitive implication: a less tightly regulated prefrontal connection may allow more information to bypass executive filtering before reaching awareness. The architecture of the creative brain may be, in a specific and literal sense, a slightly looser one. The relationship between intelligence and creativity is more complex than popular culture suggests. IQ scores and creative performance show a moderate positive correlation up to an IQ of approximately 120, after which the correlation largely disappears. Above that threshold, additional increases in measured intelligence do not predict higher creative output. What predicts creative performance across this higher range appears to be openness to experience, a personality trait characterized by intellectual curiosity, tolerance for ambiguity, and comfort with complexity and novel situations. Openness is associated with greater default mode network activity and with the same resting state neural patterns found in high sleepers. Dream content, while often bizarre and internally inconsistent, they appears to draw on the same mechanisms that support creative recombination during waking thought. Studies of dream reports find a higher frequency of remote associations, connections between concepts that are rarely linked in waking thought, than in equivalent samples of waking narrative. The bizarreness of dreams may not be a failure of the sleeping brain to maintain coherence. It may be a sign of the brain operating in a mode where ordinary associative constraints are loosened enough to permit connections that coherent waking thought systematically excludes. Researchers have studied the relationship between dreaming and creative output in populations of professional artists, writers, and scientists. While methodological challenges make this research difficult to conduct rigorously, several consistent patterns have emerged. Individuals who report more vivid and frequently remembered dreams also tend to score higher on measures of creative thinking. Those who keep dream journals and actively engage with dream content show higher rates of reporting problem-relevant insights following sleep. The practice of attending to dreams, not interpreting them symbolically, but simply noting the connections they contain, appears to extend the creative window of REM into waking life. The neuroscience of improvisation, studied most extensively in jazz musicians and freestyle rappers, has provided some of the clearest evidence for the neural signature of uninhibited creative production. In functional MRI studies, professional improvisers show reduced activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, a region associated with deliberate self-monitoring and conscious error correction, and increased activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, a core default mode network region associated with self-expression. The neural pattern of expert improvisation resembles, in important respects, the neural pattern of the drowsing mind. Both involve a reduction in conscious oversight and an increase in expressive network activity. The concept of psychological safety, feeling secure enough to produce ideas without fear of immediate judgment, has been studied extensively in organizational and educational contexts. Research consistently finds that environments and internal states characterized by reduced threat and reduced self-monitoring are associated with higher creative output. The common thread between the neuroscience of improvisation, the loosened filter of the hypnagogic state, and the findings on mindfulness and creative performance is this: the conditions most favorable to creative thought are those in which the evaluative, self-monitoring function of the prefrontal cortex is quieted. Sleep is the most complete and involuntary version of that quieting. The default mode network is sometimes called the imagination network or the narrative network by researchers who study its function. Its core regions, the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, and the angular gyrus, are consistently activated during tasks involving imagining future scenarios, recalling personal memories, constructing narrative from fragmented information, and inferring the mental states of others. These are not peripheral cognitive functions. They are among the most distinctly human capacities that the brain possesses, and they are most fully available not during peak alertness, but during quiet, relaxed, inward-turning states. the states that follow the day's demands, and precede sleep. There is growing evidence that the creative benefits of sleep extend beyond the individual sleep period. Longitudinal research has found that individuals who consistently protect REM sleep by maintaining regular sleep schedules, avoiding REM-suppressing substances, and sleeping sufficiently long to reach the late-night REM-rich cycles show sustained advantages in creative performance over time compared to those with more fragmented or shortened sleep. The brain's capacity for creative recombination appears to be, in part, a capacity that is maintained and developed through consistent access to the sleep states that support it. Sleep is not merely a one-night tool for creativity. It is part of the long-term infrastructure. The connection between sleep and creativity is not limited to the cognitive domain. Research has documented that sleep deprivation impairs emotional recognition, reduces empathy, and narrows the range of emotional experience available to waking consciousness. Since creativity, in its broadest sense, includes emotional creativity, the ability to sense, articulate, and communicate nuanced emotional experience. The effective consequences of poor sleep are also creative consequences. The person who has slept well is not only a better problem solver, they are, in ways that are measurable and neurologically grounded, a more emotionally available and expressively capable one. Midway through this hour, the answer to the central question is beginning to take a specific shape. What happens inside the brain as it lets go is not one thing, it is a cascade. The prefrontal filter softens. The default mode network expands. Norepinephrine falls. Acetylcholine shifts its function. Memory traces are replayed and integrated across distant domains. Emotional charge is reduced, while meaning is preserved. Creativity does not live in a single mechanism. It lives in the conditions that these mechanisms collectively create, conditions that are most fully present in the loosened, drifting, chemically shifted brain of the night. The second half of tonight follows what that cascade ultimately produces. That is the question this arc now follows. What just opened? The question of what the cascade produces, what the fully loosened brain finally becomes capable of, is not only a neuroscience question. You may be carrying a version of it right now. A problem you have held through many waking hours that has not yielded, a question you have approached from every direction that conscious effort provides. The second half of tonight follows what happens when the mind stops approaching it entirely. Notice your breath. Notice that it keeps moving, even when you stop directing it. The brain knows something the mind hasn't accepted yet. Now we continue. Sleep researchers have documented a phenomenon they call overnight insight consolidation, the process by which a problem that was partially worked on during waking, then set aside during sleep, emerges with a new solution upon waking. The key feature is not that the brain worked on the problem continuously during sleep. It is that the memory of the unsolved problem was tagged as unresolved before sleep, and this tagging appears to influence how the sleeping brain allocates processing during consolidation. The unresolved problem receives preferential attention during the associative reorganization of sleep. The brain does not abandon open questions. It prioritizes them. The temporal structure of sleep cycles has implications for when, during a night, creative processing is most likely to occur. The first NREM cycles of the night are dominated by slow-wave deep sleep, the stage associated most with physical restoration, immune function, and the initial transfer of memories from hippocampus to cortex. REM sleep dominates the later cycles, typically between the 5th and 8th hours of a full night's rest. This means that the creative reorganization most associated with insight and associative flexibility happens not at the beginning of the night, but toward its end, in the quiet hours before natural waking. The morning hypnopompic state, the brief period between sleep and full wakefulness, shares some features with the hypnagogic window before sleep. In both states, the prefrontal cortex has not yet returned to full engagement. Slow brainwave activity is still present alongside the faster rhythms of emerging alertness. Researchers have noted that individuals who allow themselves to remain in this state, rather than immediately engaging with external stimulation, report higher frequencies of spontaneous insight and creative connection. The morning offers a second version of the hypnagogic window, a few minutes when the night's associative work remains accessible. The neurochemical transition from sleep to waking involves the gradual reintroduction of norepinephrine and serotonin, the chemical signals of alertness and focused attention. This transition is not instantaneous. For a period following natural waking, the brain's neurochemical environment still reflects elements of the sleep state. Serotonin levels rise slowly. Norepinephrine takes time to return to waking baseline concentrations. During this chemical in-between, the associative looseness of REM coexists with enough cortical alertness to recognize and articulate the connections it has formed. This neurochemical window is brief. It is also the window in which the creative products of sleep are most accessible. The practice of keeping a notepad beside the bed, specifically for capturing the images, connections, or partial solutions that arise in the hypnagogic and hypnopompic states, has been recommended not only by creativity researchers, but by a number of notable innovators and artists. The rationale is neurological. The associations formed in these transitional states are held in a different kind of memory than ordinary waking recall. They are fragile. They do not consolidate into stable long-term memory through normal rehearsal. The act of writing them down immediately, before full wakefulness has returned, moves them into a format the waking mind can work with later. The writer's concept of morning pages, the practice of writing 3 unedited pages immediately upon waking, before engaging with any external information, aligns closely with what sleep science suggests about the hypnopompic creative window. The practice, popularized by Julia Cameron, but with earlier antecedents, functions as a method for capturing the associative looseness of early morning consciousness before the prefrontal filter fully reasserts itself. The pages are not expected to be good. They are expected to be unguarded. The value lies in bypassing the editorial function long enough to access what the sleeping brain has assembled overnight. There is evidence that the specific content of pre-sleep thought influences the content of subsequent creative processing during sleep. Studies have found that deliberately reviewing a creative problem or an unresolved question in the final 20 minutes before sleep increases, the probability of that material being incorporated into dream content and of creative solutions emerging in the period after waking. This process, sometimes called targeted memory reactivation in research contexts, operates through the same tagging mechanism that underlies overnight insight consolidation. The sleeping brain works preferentially with what the waking brain has most recently and most attentively held. The neuroscience of creative sleep has begun to intersect with research on napping, a nap of approximately 20 minutes, sufficient to reach N1 and early N2, sleep, but not deep NREM, appears to refresh attentional systems without producing the grogginess associated with deeper sleep. Naps that extend to 90 minutes, long enough to include a full sleep cycle with REM, show the strongest effects on creative performance in subsequent waking. Research led by Sarah Mednick at the University of California, Irvine has documented that an afternoon REM nap can restore creative performance to morning levels. Sleep, even in small doses, partially resets the creative substrate. The relationship between sleep and musical creativity has been studied in both professional musicians and amateur participants. Research findings suggest that REM sleep is specifically involved in the consolidation of musical structure, the implicit learning of harmonic relationships, melodic patterns, and rhythmic sequences that underlies musical intuition. Musicians who sleep between practice sessions show faster acquisition of complex musical passages than those who practice for equivalent time without an intervening sleep period. The same mechanism that helps the brain extract hidden rules from mathematical sequences appears to operate on the temporal and tonal structures of music. Language creativity, the ability to produce novel metaphors, find unexpected verbal connections, and construct narratives that hold multiple meanings simultaneously, shows particular sensitivity to sleep quality. Research on sleep restriction and cognitive performance has consistently found that creative language production, as distinct from routine language, is among the cognitive functions most reliably affected by reduced sleep. The proposed mechanism involves the default mode network. Language creativity depends on flexible access to semantic associations across distant conceptual domains. The same access that is facilitated by the DMN's expanded activity during relaxed states and narrowed by the focused processing of sleep-deprived fatigue. Across the lifespan, the character of creative thought changes in ways that parallel changes in sleep architecture. Children, who spend a higher proportion of their sleep time in REM and who show lower prefrontal inhibitory control, produce creative associations that are broader and less constrained than adults. Adults with the highest creative output tend to show sleep patterns that preserve REM, adequate total sleep time, regular timing, and avoidance of REM-suppressing substances. The neurobiology of creativity is not separate from the biology of sleep. In important ways, it appears to be a consequence of it. The question of what it means to let go, in the neuroscientific sense, has been explored by researchers studying the deactivation of the default executive network during creative and meditative states. What letting go appears to involve neurologically is a reduction in the activity of circuits associated with self-monitoring self-criticism, and the maintenance of behavioral consistency. These circuits are metabolically expensive. They consume significant resources to sustain, and they serve important functions during waking, social, and goal-directed behavior. During sleep, their activity decreases substantially. The resources they had been consuming are redirected. What they redirected to is, in part, what tonight has been about: the neurotransmitter dopamine, most associated in popular understanding with pleasure and reward, also plays a role in the neuroscience of creativity and sleep. Dopamine is involved in the salient system, the network that determines which information is tagged as worth attending to. Research has found that dopamine signaling influences the breadth of attentional focus, with higher dopaminergic tone associated with broader, more diffuse attention and a higher rate of loose associations. Sleep regulates dopamine receptor sensitivity over time. Consistent. Restorative sleep maintains the dopamine system in a state that supports flexible, curious, wide-ranging attention. Chronic sleep deprivation gradually degrades it. The experience of flow, the psychological state described by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi as one of effortless, highly focused creative engagement, shares neurological features with both deep creative sleep and the hypnagogic state. In flow, as in these sleep-adjacent states, the self-monitoring circuits of the prefrontal cortex show reduced activity. The experience of time distorts. Attention becomes both highly focused and strangely effortless. Researchers have proposed that flow is a waking state that temporarily replicates the neurochemical conditions of creative sleep, one in which the filter is not absent but transparent, allowing the full associative range of the brain to be in service of a single, engaging task. By this point in tonight's arc, a second pattern has emerged alongside the first. Not only does the loosening of neural connections enable creativity, the brain has, built into its architecture, a daily mechanism for producing that loosening, one that operates reliably, involuntarily, and with consequences that extend into the following day. The question is not whether the brain makes space for creative thought. It does. Every night, in every person, regardless of whether they consider themselves creative. The question the next facts carry is a quieter one. What does it mean that this capacity has always been there? And what is possible when we stop working against it? The default assumption in many cultures that the productive hours are the waking hours, that rest is a suspension of work, that the sleeping mind is an absent one, is, from a neurological standpoint, precisely reversed in at least one domain. The sleeping brain is not absent from the creative work of the day that preceded it. It is completing it. The waking brain gathers. The sleeping brain connects. The waking brain builds the warehouse. The sleeping brain rearranges the inventory in the dark, in ways that the warehouse manager could not have planned. The morning inventory is different from the evening one. The difference is the night. The brain's glymphatic system, a network of fluid channels surrounding the brain's blood vessels, is most active during sleep, specifically during slow-wave NREM. During this clearance process, cerebrospinal fluid, flows through the brain tissue, removing metabolic waste products that accumulate during waking neural activity. Among the substances cleared are adenosine, the chemical whose buildup during waking hours creates the sensation of sleepiness, and proteins associated with neurodegenerative processes. Research into this system, much of it conducted initially in animal models, suggests that its nightly activity may contribute to the neural clarity that follows a full night's rest, clearing the chemical residue of a day's focused effort. The idea that creativity requires struggle, that the painful, effortful hours of working on a problem are where creative value is generated, is not contradicted by sleep research. What sleep research adds is a second half of the picture. The struggle is real and necessary. It loads the problem into working memory, defines its parameters, and creates the urgency that prioritizes it for overnight processing. Without the struggle, there is nothing for the sleeping brain to work with. But without the subsequent release, the transition into rest, the creative work, the struggle made possible, cannot proceed. The effort and the rest are sequential. Researchers studying the neural basis of creative illumination, the moment when a new idea or solution fully surfaces, have noted that it almost never occurs during focused effort on the problem. It occurs after, during a walk, during a shower, at the edge of sleep, in the early morning. The common factor across these contexts is reduced prefrontal engagement and reduced focused attention on the problem itself. The illumination arrives when the mind is doing something else, or nothing at all. This observation, supported by neuroimaging data, points toward the same conclusion. The creative brain works best when the managing brain has stepped aside. The concept of diffuse thinking, a term used by learning scientist Barbara Oakley to describe the brain's unfocused, relaxed processing mode, has gained attention in educational and cognitive science contexts. Oakley distinguishes between the focused mode, tight, directed, using familiar pathways, and the diffuse mode, loose, expansive, making connections across the full breadth of stored knowledge. Her research and teaching on this distinction have reached millions of people through online education. The neuroscience underlying the distinction is the interaction between the executive control network and the default mode network, the same systems that tonight has been tracing through the architecture of sleep. There is a parallel in the history of science between the structure of the sleep creativity cycle and the structure of scientific discovery more broadly. Thomas Kuhn's description of paradigm shifts, in which the accumulation of anomalies eventually forces the reorganization of an entire theoretical framework, shares structural features with overnight insight consolidation. The anomalies accumulate during waking effort. The reorganization occurs in a period of reduced deliberate control. The result is a framework that accommodates what the previous one could not. The sleeping brain and the history of science may be operating at very different scales. Through a related process, the neurological loosening that occurs during the transition to sleep is not a loss of function. It is a shift of function. The brain moving from focused wakefulness toward N1, and then into the deeper reorganization of NREM and REM, is not becoming less than it was. It is becoming differently capable. The capabilities that come online as the prefrontal filter steps back are not inferior to the ones it suppresses. They are complementary. The broad-range search that focused attention cannot perform. The long-distance connections that categorical thinking holds apart. The emotional associations that executive processing tends to bracket. The loosening is not emptying. It is opening. Sleep researchers distinguish what they call sleep quality from sleep quantity, recognizing that the creative and cognitive benefits of sleep depend not only on how long a person sleeps, but on the continuity, architecture, and depth of that sleep. Fragmented sleep, even when total duration is adequate, shows reduced slow-wave NREM and reduced REM. The creative and restorative benefits that depend on these stages are correspondingly reduced. Conditions that disrupt sleep architecture, irregular timing, light exposure at night, chronic stress, can impair the creative function of sleep, even when they do not obviously impair its duration. The relationship between sleep and the creative unconscious has been a subject of philosophical and psychological speculation long before it became a subject of neuroscientific inquiry. Freud's model of the unconscious, active during dreaming, processing material unavailable to waking awareness, was an early attempt to describe what happens outside conscious attention during sleep. Contemporary neuroscience has replaced the specific Freudian framework with a very different one. But it has confirmed the core intuition that something meaningful happens during sleep that is not accessible to and not directed by the waking conscious mind, and that what happens there shapes what the waking mind encounters in the morning. The loosening of neural connections as we drift towards sleep is not incidental to the creative capacity of the human brain. It is structural to it. Every night, the brain enters a state in which the filters of waking attention step back. The networks of stored knowledge spread and reconnect. The emotional charge of the day is metabolized, and the unsolved problems of the waking hours are reorganized beyond the reach of conscious intention. The remaining facts carry a different quality. Not more information about the mechanism, but the texture of what it means that this capacity exists in every person, every night, waiting to be allowed. You might be feeling tired now. That's perfectly fine. Breathe slowly. Feel the cycles. The brain follows cycles. Waking and sleeping. Focused and diffuse. Holding and releasing. These are not failures of consistency. They are the pattern itself. Like your breath. In and out. In and out. A small rhythm within the larger one the night provides. You don't need to hold on to anything right now. Let everything settle into its natural order. The loosening is not something you do. It is something the brain already knows how to do, given the space. We're almost there now. Every person who has ever woken with an answer they didn't have the night before has experienced the creative function of sleep directly, not as a theory, as a fact about their own mind. The neuroscience provides the mechanism. The experience provides the evidence. They point to the same thing from different directions. And tonight, perhaps, that experience is a little closer than it was before. The brain that is drifting towards sleep right now is not pausing from its work. It is entering a different phase of it. The associations forming in the quiet of this hour, between what the day held and what the memory carries, will be available in the morning in ways they are not yet available now. Something is being built here, without effort, in the dark. There is something gently subversive in the science of creative sleep. The culture that rewards visible effort, extended hours, and the suppression of rest has, encoded in the biology it operates on, a quiet counter-argument. The biology insists, night after night, that the work requires the rest, that the problem requires the release, that the insight requires the interval. The body has always known this. The prefrontal cortex will reassert itself in the morning. The filter will return. The categories will reclose. This is not a loss. The focused, organized, evaluative mind is necessary. But the loosened mind that preceded it will have left something behind. A connection, a direction, a quiet certainty about something that was uncertain before. That is the gift the night delivers. Salvador Dali held a key in his hand as he napped, so that it would fall when he drifted into sleep and wake him in time to capture what the hypnagogic state had shown him. Thomas Edison used steel balls for the same purpose. These were practical methods for staying at the threshold, methods built on the same observation that sleep science now confirms. Something worth catching lives there. The default mode network is most active when the mind is least directed. It is the network of imagination, of future simulation, of narrative construction. It is most fully itself in the quiet that follows the day's demands. Right now, as these words settle, it is more active than it was when you began this hour. Something in you is already ranging ahead. Norepinephrine, the chemical that keeps the categories tight, the filter engaged, the associations narrow, has been falling since you lay down. Its fall is not something that happens to you from outside. It is something your brain initiates, precisely and deliberately, as part of the nightly transition toward rest. The loosening is not random. It is not an accident. It is a scheduled event, built into the architecture of every night. The associative looseness of the sleeping brain is not a regression to a less sophisticated mode of thinking. It is access to a different kind of sophistication, one that specializes in connection rather than exclusion, in pattern rather than precision, in the broad sweep rather than the focused point. Both modes are the brain working. Tonight belongs to the second one. Research on creative thought across the lifespan suggests that the capacity for unexpected association does not inevitably diminish with age. What changes is its texture and domain. Older adults who maintain healthy sleep tend to draw connections across a wider span of accumulated experience, finding relationships between things gathered across decades, in ways that a younger mind, with less to draw from, cannot yet reach. The loosening remains. The material it works with deepens. The N1 window, that brief state between wakefulness and sleep, is available every night to every person. It does not require equipment, training, or special preparation. It requires only the willingness to enter it without immediately falling through or reversing back. The steel ball and the falling key were methods for holding that window open long enough to see what it contained. A quiet mind, it turns out, is another REM sleep. In the later hours of the night is when the brain's associative reorganization is deepest and most wide-ranging. The final cycles of a full night's sleep, often the first to be sacrificed by early alarms and late bedtimes, are the ones that most directly serve the creative function. The hours between 6 and 8 in the morning, for many adults, contain some of the most REM-rich sleep of the night. They are also, in many schedules, the first to be cut. The morning after a night of good sleep is not merely the beginning of a new day. It is the delivery of the previous night's creative work. The connections made in the dark are available in the light. The problems reorganized, while awareness was absent, present themselves, sometimes quietly, sometimes with unexpected clarity, as the prefrontal cortex comes back online and begins to evaluate what the sleeping brain left behind. There is something worth sitting with in the fact that the most generative state the brain enters, the one in which the most novel connections form, the most intractable problems reorganize, the most emotionally laden memories metabolize, is one in which you are not trying to do any of those things. You are simply resting. The work is happening as the part of you that insists on direction lets go. The question that opened tonight, what happens inside the brain as it lets go, has been followed through waking fatigue, through the hypnagogic threshold, through the neurochemistry of REM, through the architecture of insight, through the morning clarity that follows. Each stage was a version of the same answer. The loosening creates the conditions, and the conditions create the possibility, and the possibility, given rest, becomes a connection that was not there before. The science of creative sleep is, in a quiet way, a science of permission. Permission to rest. Permission to release the problem. Permission to trust that the interval between effort and insight is not empty, but full of processing that conscious attention cannot perform and cannot accelerate. The neuroscience does not merely explain creativity. It argues for a different relationship to the night. The cultures that have most honored sleep, that have built rest into the architecture of the day, that have protected the transitional states before and after sleep, may have been responding, without scientific language, to something their members had observed over long experience, that the people who rest well think differently in the morning, solve problems the previous day could not crack, and create things that the tired mind could not have reached. The default mode network, the hypnagogic threshold, the overnight consolidation of memory, the emotional metabolizing of REM. These are not optional features of the brain. They are part of its essential architecture. The focused, productive, achievement-oriented waking mind is built, in part, on the foundation that sleep constructs every night. Without the foundation, the structure is still possible, but not what it could be. Tonight has been an experiment in its own subject. The brain, listening to these facts, has been drifting gradually through the same arc the facts describe The prefrontal filter has been easing. The default mode network has been expanding. The norepinephrine has been falling. The associations available right now are different from the ones available when the hour began. You have been, without effort, moving through the mechanism the science describes. The loosening that creativity requires is available to every person who enters sleep, not as a talent, not as a technique, not as a practice that must be acquired, but as a biological fact about what the brain does when given the conditions. The conditions are simple: darkness, quiet, warmth, and the willingness to stop directing. The brain does the rest. What remains, as tonight reaches its quietest place, is something that is not quite a fact. It is more like a recognition. The brain that has been working hard, holding much, and finding its way toward rest has not failed when it cannot solve the problem through effort alone. It has simply reached the edge of what effort can access. Beyond that edge, in the dark, something else begins. Something patient. Something that has been waiting for the effort to stop. Something real happens in the quiet before sleep, and in the deep reorganization that follows, that the bright, busy, managed hours of the day cannot replicate. The brain at rest is not less than the brain at work. It is doing different work, in a different mode, with different tools, and some of the things it builds there, it could not have built anywhere else. Creativity is not a gift given to some and withheld from others. It is a capacity of the human brain, expressed most fully in the conditions the sleeping brain naturally creates: loosened filtering, expanded association, emotional metabolizing, and the quiet reorganization of what the day gathered. The conditions are biological. The access is available to every person who rests and allows the night to do its work. The night is not a pause between the days of creative life. It is an active participant in it. What the mind releases into sleep, sleep returns transformed. Not always, not predictably, but reliably enough that the relationship between rest and insight has been observed by artists, scientists, and ordinary people across every culture that has left a record. Right now, the brain is very close to the state the whole hour has been about. The filter is soft. The associations are wide. The default mode network is doing what it does best. Whatever the day held that felt unsolvable, unfinished, or simply heavy, it is being quietly handled. Not by you, by the part of you that works while the rest of you rests. The answer to tonight's question is not a scientific conclusion. It is something closer to a recognition. The loosening is not something that happens to the creative mind. The loosening is the creative mind, the one that the managing, filtering, evaluating waking mind spends all day holding at a careful distance, and that the night, with great patience, finally lets through. In these final minutes, take the deepest breath you can. As deep as possible, think about consciousness itself. Yours, mine, everyone listening, all awareness moving toward the same threshold tonight. Think about the default mode network spreading through its quiet territory. The hippocampus replaying the day in the dark. The REM cycles not yet arrived, but waiting in the architecture of the hours ahead. You are not separate from the process the night performs. You are inside it. Let your entire being dissolve into the space before thought, into the place where the associations form, and the connections hold, and the mind that was trying has finally, gently, stopped. 100 facts ago, we were asking what happens inside the brain when it finally stops holding on. Now we know it does not simply stop, it shifts. The norepinephrine falls. The default mode network spreads. The N1 threshold opens a window that Edison reached for with steel balls and Dali caught with a falling key. We followed the loosening from the hypnagogic state through REM's associative reorganization, through the morning clarity that follows a night. The waking mind did not direct. What began as a question about creativity became an answer about architecture. The creative capacity was never absent. It was waiting, every night, for the filter to soften enough to let it through. The loosening of neural connections as we drift towards sleep is not incidental to who you are when you wake. It is part of how you become what you are not yet. Whatever you are holding that hasn't resolved, the night has always been the place it was going to. Tonight, the science of how the sleeping brain unlocks what the waking mind cannot reach brought you here. A gentle subscribe helps another restless, creative mind find this quiet space too. That small act sends this hour towards someone who may need it tonight. One quiet tap, one sleepy soul at a time. But there's no need to do anything now. Nothing at all. You've traveled far tonight. Allow these thoughts of the loosening brain, of norepinephrine falling, and networks spreading, and the night doing its quiet work, to fade now, like the last effort of a mind that has finally decided to stop, leaving only the open, warm, calm behind. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body feel heavier, as if the ground beneath you has gently claimed you back. If sleep comes, let it carry you, like the solution that arrives, not when you reach for it, but when you release, smoothly, inevitably, into a place where time and weight no longer matter. Deep sleep, with mind science, has been holding this territory across many hours, the space where the science of the mind meets the quiet of the night. The next hour follows the part of tonight's question that this one did not have time to finish. That hour is waiting whenever you are ready. But if your eyes are closed, stay there. Stay in the darkness that feels safe and warm. Tomorrow, the loosening will happen again. The night will do what it always does. But tonight belongs to stillness. Rest well, quiet one. And remember, the brain that creates is not the one that tries the hardest. It is the one that finally lets go, where curiosity ends and sleep begins. Good night.